It's great to be here. I'm genuinely excited about this conversation because I've been listening, obviously, for the last day and a half. And trust is, I think I actually did a word search on the last 2 days and on the agenda, and it's everywhere. But I think it's nowhere more relevant personally as well as professionally as when you put it in a context of healthcare. So I'm really grateful to be joined by Dr. Mishra and also Noor. I think we're going to have a great conversation. You're going to have to keep me on track. I know I'm the moderator here, but there's so many things I want to ask you. I might start with you, Dr. Mishra, if that's all right. Sunitha, you know, when we think about healthcare, we're obviously here at a conference that thinks about commercial aspects, you know, professional environment, and what the opportunities are from a business context. But the reason I think this is such an important topic is because we are all, at some point in our lives, patients. So how do you think about AI, you know, really zooming out before we go straight into data and trust and the like? How do you think about AI and its benefits to potentially patient healthcare and patient outcomes?
Yeah, so I'm incredibly optimistic about what AI can do in healthcare. What we've heard from our customers, and I think if I took a poll, probably every single one of you would say that you've had a trying experience with healthcare where you felt it was really impersonal and oftentimes inhuman. And so just as we've heard from other panelists yesterday, there's an opportunity for us to let humans do what humans do best. And in healthcare, that trust between a patient and provider, that therapeutic relationship is so important. And we've now put a wall of a computer screen in between the patient and the provider. And so there's an opportunity to really move that to the side and let the provider and the patient connect on a more human level. So from a provider's perspective, I think that's really valuable, as well as automating a lot of the work that they do. In some clinics, you can spend over 50% of your day doing administrative tasks, and I think there's a real opportunity to automate that, again, bringing the joy back to practice for the provider. And then for the patient, there's a real opportunity to help navigate the system a lot better by sharing options for care, making more transparency with the cost, and also helping patients with that to-do list that you often end up with after you see the physician, of get this test and get that consultation and this imaging, and you are responsible for scheduling that all yourself. I think if we can use AI to help close the loop on some of those things, there's a tremendous opportunity to improve outcomes.
I love that. So what you're emphasizing is the fact that you can spend more time on that human interaction and the patient sort of primary care physician or the doctor experience, because AI might be leverageable sort of in the back end or with the administrative tasks and the like. Okay.
That's right.
So then, Noor, thinking about that in the back end, you know, your specialty amongst many others is drug discovery. Do you find that AI can be a sort of enabler for that, but does it not also bring up risks for you when you think about traditional drug discovery and the process of doing that?
So my specialty is drug discovery for the past 6 years, and I've now been kind of moving towards diagnostics, cancer diagnostics, and the prognosis. So trying to kind of bridge the gap between what happens in the early stages of drug discovery, so figuring out which compound might work, to what actually could work in a human settings, and looking at the kind of phenotyping of human and how do we understand the morphology and the distribution of the human patient population and linking that to drug discovery. And I think AI is, I come from a scientific background, so I think a lot about like science and how can we really make not just patient life easier, but also the physicians and the pathologists and the clinicians all kind of benefit from AI capabilities. And I think it's very important to understand that there's a lot to be happening just kind of in those downstream areas. So in drug discovery, there's a lot of potential for AI to bring in new medicines in a way that we humans haven't thought possible, even just in terms of designing new chemical entities and bringing those to patients. But there's also a lot happening in terms of understanding the patient population and who are the patients that could benefit from certain treatment versus the others that might not be as beneficial, for the treatment that might not be as beneficial. And there's a lot of, I think, when it comes to AI, I think we need to think about it in a way that we don't necessarily kind of project our human elements on it, because it's completely different thing. It doesn't think in a way that we think, and it doesn't operate in the same way. And if we think about pathology, where we now work, there's a lot that is within kind of the pathology slide, so the tissue slide that comes from a patient that we don't see with a human eye, even at very experts train the human eye, and pathologists do need that help because of the shortage of pathologists, for instance, because they don't have enough hours within the day to treat each patient with the same care as they should be treated. So it's in part accelerating and making their daily process more efficient, but it's also, there is a huge amount of information that it's not even accessible at the moment that AI can make accessible. And that will bring a lot of new areas and a new dimension to how we see patients and how we understand cancer and how we eventually treat those patients as well.
Okay, interesting. So there's a consistent theme between what you both said about accessibility, but bringing efficiencies to what, I guess, healthcare and medicine is ultimately about, which is treating patients. Coming back to you, Sunitha, when you actually said you thought everyone in the room probably has experience, I thought you were about to say with an Amazon product, and I almost raised my hand. So I'm going to now bring this back to trust, because we've sort of established that the potential of AI can obviously enhance the experience between practitioner and patient. How do you then make sure or engender that there's trust in that process because of what's happening in the back end? And with Amazon, you're from, as a company, and I know it's not your specific remit, but everything from the cloud to devices in home to e-com, everywhere, and now healthcare. I would imagine you have an opportunity, but there's probably also pitfalls for you as a company to try and emphasize the trust of what you do.
Yeah, we never take for granted a single day that we have our customers' trust. And I think that is even more so true in healthcare, given the responsibility. We actually have introduced a new leadership principle a couple of years ago, which says with size and scale comes responsibility, and that's very true with the way we're designing our AI products. Through the sort of complex process by which we build our models, we actually build tenets into the way we develop our products. And we use those as ways to probe to make sure that our products are built with safety in mind, privacy, fairness, and accuracy. And we are actually just adopting those same tenets as we develop products and AI products for healthcare as well.
Okay. And Noor, do you set up principles, ways of working, guidelines when you are working on diagnostics and sort of the efficiency that you're trying to bring?
I think as long as you're not touching patient data, there's like a less of issues when it comes to trust and transparency. So in drug discovery, for instance, it was not as, we didn't really talk about trust because it's usually just kind of chemical compounds and proteins. So there's like nothing that's related to patient data. But now with pathology, for instance, and trying to understand cancer, you need to relate what you see, for instance, in a tissue sample or like a biopsy to what actually happens to the patient before and after. So what's the journey of the patient? When was he first diagnosed? What the age, the gender, and the ethnicity, and so on and so forth. And then the treatment journey, so what treatment have been used, what was the outcome of it, and for how long did he survive, or what have you. So when it comes to these issues, I think there's a lot of unknown still in terms of how we treat patient data, who access which data, who owns the data. Usually we would assume that every patient should own his own data, and if it is used for any commercial purposes, then the patient ideally should know about that and get some of the benefits. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Usually patients just give up data in a hospital or what have you, and then the hospitals, actually we've seen instances where hospitals sell the data and the patient don't even know about it. So there's still a lot to figure out, especially now in terms of AI and people starting to understand that data is a gold mine, and the more data you have, the more value basically you have. So people are starting to figure out what is really the value of what we're building. Even within the hospitals, the hospital value is perhaps now, part of it is providing the care and the services that they traditionally used to provide, but I think it's becoming more and more the case where they realize that there is also value in the data that they've been collecting. But there's also a lot of questions around, yes, but where that boundary sits in terms of, do you really own the data? Do you get to sell it to other parties? Do you get to decide to who to sell it to? Or is it more kind of, you should open it for innovation and let the world decide who are the best innovators and who are the best people to cure cancer, and let it be open, because nobody really owns it. It's a patient data by the end of the day. And for me, if you think about the fundamentals, we are all here to provide the best care and the best care possible for patients and to provide the best medication, the best treatment for cancer in our case. So I think it's, if we keep this in mind, I'm kind of very much with the open system, data should be accessible to all, and people should be able to innovate and provide solutions that by the end of the day, the aim is just to cure cancer and just to provide better care for patients.
And it's so clear from what you're saying, and of course throughout your career, your aims have been really, really, pure and, like you say, trying to get the better patient outcomes. And of course, Sunitha, you said the same thing. I think the challenge is that, and this came up in the last session as well, or I think somebody actually asked a question from the audience, there are bad actors, right? The reality of the situation is there are bad actors. So, and as you've also mentioned, Noor, once there's this appreciation for the fact that the data is actually intrinsically valuable from a commercial point of view, that can also, affect the bad behavior or, go against what we're wanting for the positive outcomes. What can be done, do you have, from your expertise, from the experience that you've both had, what can be done to mitigate against these risks, aside from the tenets? What's a sort of a quality assurance or a QA or a checks and balances approach to these?
I mean, what we're doing at Amazon is we're being very transparent with our customers about when we would use their data, and that would be we wouldn't use it. We have made it very, there's the wall between sort of the consumer side and what we're doing in healthcare, because we don't want to lose that consumer trust.
I think for us, given that we're a startup, we try to be innovative in the way that we collaborate or build customer base or like commercial traction. So usually try to come up with structure where it's a win-win strategy. So the hospital, yes, you own the data. Yes, you basically own the data in a way, because you have the keys to kind of for people to access it. But you can't really monetize it or capitalize on it unless you have the like machine learning expertise or like data science expertise to kind of actually use that gold mine to extract information from it and then use it in a meaningful way. So it's a way to kind of, we can collaborate together where we as a startup can gain something from it, can move innovation forward and bring cures to patients and identify the right patient population and what have you. And you as a hospital will be kind of leading on the innovation side. You'll be able, for instance, a lot of people are, especially in hospital pathologists, for instance, interested in publication, interested in being the leaders in AI pathology. So you have to understand what are the motivations, what are the people incentives, what really makes them happy, enjoying their life and providing the best value and the best care possible. You have to align that with the commercial incentive for the hospital, and then you have to, as a startup, to stay to exist and to be able to innovate. So I think a lot of it comes to bringing the right stakeholders on board, building the right structure for the agreement that would allow everyone to benefit from it, including patients by the end of the day.
And sorry if this is putting it too fine a point on it. What does that structure look like?
It's really open to innovation. It's a lot of like really figuring out what everyone wants by the end of the day and trying to come up with a structure that is, so you basically draft it from scratch. Right. It's not like a commercial agreement that exists and you're trying to adopt it.
You're not taking it off the shelf. You actually have to develop it together.
Exactly. It's a field that is moving very quickly, and everyone is just kind of trying to get a sense about what is going on and how do we move quickly with it, but at the same time benefit from the outcomes. Sure. So yeah, it's exciting.
And Noor, you mentioned a few times being a startup, and so I should probably ask you the sort of opposite of the question that I asked Sunitha, which is, as a startup, when you're working with hospitals, you're working with larger organizations, you're working with patient groups, how do you engender trust? How do you project the fact that you're trustworthy, you're going to be doing the right things, you don't have bad actors, or you've got structures in place to mitigate against that?
I think people tend to trust startups more than bigger organizations, like just generally speaking, because...
Sure, not yours.
I'm so sorry. It's just like the nature of like innovators and like new companies trying to kind of push the boundaries and innovate and try to fight existing systems and existing untrusted systems to be frank. So I think for us, it's mostly working on the human level, like the personal level, because because we're a startup, we kind of can afford to talk to every person like one-to-one and to understand their needs, understand the human value of what they do, and understand what's the incentive, why they are here, why they're doing what they're doing, and build that personal trust, which I think is is mostly missing, to be honest, when it comes to as you grow, bigger organizations become harder to build that personal relationship, which we usually tend to forget about, but it's super important.
I think that's probably fair in that people will understand that startups can have a more personal relationship with them because they're smaller, they're kind of starting out that way. I think the risk is that startups have this sweeping generalization that they're moving fast, breaking things, and they're trying to work so quickly. That's the part where I think there's a concern that there might not be as much compliance or governance in place as a large organization. Just for both of you, but I mean, Noor's already alluded to how you work with larger organizations. Does Amazon, when you're looking at Amazon Health, Amazon Care, and you're looking at expanding what you're doing for patient benefit, do you collaborate with startups and smaller organizations as well?
We actually collaborate quite extensively with hospitals.
Okay.
So just for those who may not be familiar with Amazon Health Services, our goal is to improve health outcomes by making it easier for customers to get medications, get care, and we do the care through a product called Amazon Clinic, which is sort of low acuity care that you can get on Amazon.com, as well as a primary care system that we've acquired. And they actually have extensive relationships with health systems. And so one of the things that we find really important, again, to keep that customer trust is being able to connect the dots. And so going from a primary care experience to something that you may need to be in the hospital for, it was important for us to have that ability to connect the dots across the journey just because it is so difficult. And then the other part of our business is getting medications, and so that's Amazon Pharmacy. And again, we are able to get medications to customers low cost with lots of transparency around the pricing, where we're using large language models to be able to surface prices. For those of you who live in the US, oftentimes you don't know how much something's going to cost until you get to the counter, and then you get the surprise bill, and we just didn't feel like that was an experience that was acceptable. So I would say that we've been partnering with health systems more so than others.
Than startups. So I warned that there were going to be so many questions I want to ask. There's so many things I want to go into, but maybe one more thing before I give people in the room a chance to ask questions as well. We were talking about, the frame of the session, the title, and I sort of feel like we should maybe go back to that a little bit, was about data foundations and trust in data foundations. And a lot of the conversations these two, I think, have been really, really interesting because they've forced us all to think about sort of bigger picture consequences. But I also want to be able to have some practical tactics, again, based on the expertise that you both have. When you're establishing or trying to establish trust in data foundations, do you have governance boards? Do you have, 7-8 years ago, I was a member of the DeepMind Health Independent Reviewers Panel. Do you put in place layers of review? Do you put in place, checks? How do you audit the fact that the data is being preserved or protected in such a way, again, so that you can engender trust? Are there any tactics or approaches that you've seen that work better than others?
So one of the things that we've been doing, because we do have providers now that work with us, we have a board of our clinicians that actually works really closely with our teams to ensure that there's accurate information. We're also really mindful of being aware of bias. And so, as many of you may be aware, there's bias in our healthcare system today. I like to quote the statistic that, or the fact that in the U.S., we weren't mandated to have females as part of our clinical trials until 1993. And so I think this is a real opportunity for us to work to make sure that we're being intentional about not propagating that bias. So as these transformational tools are being created, we actually can have a different system in the future. And so I think there's an opportunity there for us to partner with others, other health systems, other people in the ecosystem to be mindful of that.
Yeah. Noor, do you have anything that you do that might be best in class, sort of what people can take away or lessons?
Yeah, I think when it comes to drug discovery and cancer diagnostics, and when you think about from a software point of view, they're usually standard ISO standards that the software should comply with, and those are especially important in healthcare systems. So we tend to collaborate with people, but there's also like a big demand for us to be just compliant and to be able to implement those standards in our systems. But I think from kind of, if we take like a broader view about like what it means in the healthcare settings, there's also a lot of issues that relates to data biases. So if you work with a specific hospital, for instance, you get access to data from that geography. So the kind of the population that we get access to is usually very limited to that ethnicity of people and that group of people. So we tend to be mindful of the fact that whatever method that we develop and that we apply is usually accurate for that specific population, and it has to be tested again if we are moved to another geography, than another country or another subgroup. So we tend to do studies on specific populations, and then we tend to generalize those studies and make sure that we're very clear about the intention of the study and what are the population that we addressed within that study, and the fact that there might be limitations when it's applied to others.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to get told off because I was told if we get to 2 minutes, there's no time for questions. But I'm sitting here now, so I'm going to see if there's at least one question, because I do feel like it would be unfair not to let that happen. Can we, for the lady in front, and I'm sorry, first one I saw because I'm time pressed.
Hi, my name is Namrata. I'm a Chief Product Officer. I've worked in healthcare a few times. You mentioned about bias, and I think that's a very important topic. So I'm just curious, this question for Sunita, do you see an adoption bias in your services? In terms of communities and people who adopt healthcare, especially with modern technologies, because I have worked in healthcare in the past, and we do see an adoption bias quite clearly. That's the first question. The second question is just scalability of your services. How do you scale it up so that it's mass used?
I might have to limit Sunita to one answer.
Just one question. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Either one.
So I could talk, I don't know which one to take. They're both such juicy questions. I'll talk the scalability one. I mean, I think that this is where we think artificial intelligence and generative models are going to be really valuable, because if we can remove some of those things that clinicians don't need to do, they're going to be able to spend more time taking care of more patients as well. And so I think that's the real opportunity to scale.
Thank you for that. I am going to get told off, but thanks for that question. I'm sorry I couldn't get to more. There were so many other things I wanted to ask about with transparency, with bias, with the scalability. But just to recap, I'm really sort of buoyed by the fact that I think there was consistency about the fact that the real potential for AI in healthcare, and whether it's based on those data foundations or other layers, is that we can enable clinicians and physicians to work more closely with their patients and to improve patient outcomes. And that what I heard is having checks in place, whether it's key tenets, whether it's advisory boards, whether it's review boards or otherwise, to make sure that the data is being considered as sacrosanct, and that the intentions are being followed through, is what will hopefully keep us on the right track. So sorry I talked so much and I ran out of time for more, but thank you so much to Noor and to Sunita for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.